I'm grateful that she can share with us today her story. So without further ado, this is Kate.
Yeah, I moved here 3.5 months ago, and I met Derek the second day I lived in California. So if that's not good luck, I don't know what is. But yeah, I'm really honored that he asked me to share a little bit of my story. I'm really thankful that all of you are here. I know Friday nights are it's like a precious time, right? Like that's your time, and so the fact that you're here means a lot to, I think, both of us. So yeah, I also just want to give like a disclaimer before I start. I'm very much like still in process, just like all of you, and I'm still healing. Like I think it's a process that never ends, and so I just want to take away any like expectation that this is all going to tie up in a bow at the end, because you might be disappointed if that's what you think is going to happen. But I'm just still figuring it out. But I'm excited to share a little bit of my story with you. So yeah, I'm Kate. I am from East Tennessee, which is really far from here and also really different than here. And I think I knew it was different, like culturally, politically, like all of these things I knew it was different. But this week in Tennessee, we got a lot of snow, and so my dad sent me a video of him like driving up my uncle's driveway, and there was all this snow in the trees and on the road. And so I showed it to some of my coworkers because I was like, perfect, they're all from California, they have no idea where I'm from, this is a perfect visual. And I showed it to them, and the first thing, they were like amazed that people still do life when it's 23 degrees, like that was appalling to them. And then also the next thing they noticed was, which I never noticed this because I grew up in Tennessee, but they're like, the trees are so tall and so close to the road. Like, is that safe? Is that normal? All of these things. So all of that to say, I'm learning that Tennessee and California are really different. But now that you maybe like kind of have a picture of Tennessee in your head, or I can give you a little bit more of a visual. My house, like our closest neighbor is 50 acres away. My backyard and the woods are like kind of synonymous, like same thing. There's not really like a line where my backyard ends and the woods begin, so it's the same thing. But I want you to picture a little girl, like maybe she's 7 or 8 years old. Could be me, could be somebody else. But she loves to run in the woods after school. Like that's pretty much what she does until it's time for supper. And so one day she's running in the woods, and there's this old board, and it has a rusty nail sticking out of it. And she's running, she's like having so much fun, jumping, exploring. This is what she lives to do. And out of nowhere, she steps on this nail and immediately stops. And she's like screaming in pain, right? But my question is, was the pain that she felt in her foot a bad thing? Interactive portion, somebody talk to me. No, why wasn't it a bad thing, Tinashe?
Indicator that something's wrong.
Right, because what would have happened if she hadn't stopped running? A lot worse pain, like a lot worse damage would have been done to her foot. Maybe it would have taken even longer to heal, right? So like the pain is probably a good thing because yeah, like you said, it's telling her that there's something she needs to pay attention to. So that leads me to kind of wonder if the pain in our lives is actually an indicator of something beneath the surface that needs attention. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's kind of like a flashing light saying, let's check out like what's going on under the hood. So pain's a natural part of our lives, right? We all know it's gonna happen, not an if, but a when. And something about me, a bit of a fun fact, in my spare time, I love to learn about neuroscience, which I realize is a sharp right turn, but it's gonna connect. But we all have something in our brain called the limbic system. It's really fascinating if you know anything about it. I know a little bit about it, and I'm going to try to explain it to you. But it's essentially where all of our hardwiring, our emotions, and our memories are stored. And if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, Disney Pixar, like where all of those, that control room, like where all of those emotions are being tied to memory, that's our limbic system. And it's all subconscious, but it controls like everything that we do. And it's also highly affected by trauma. So this part of our brain shapes like our reality, our inner world, and the lens we see everything through. Yeah, and so any like trauma or adverse experience that you've had at any part of your life, but especially during childhood, when our brain is like in those very early developmental stages, anytime you feel something that reminds you of that initial memory, your limbic system gets triggered. So I'm a teacher at a deaf school, and I use sign language to communicate all day, which means I do very, very well with visuals and literal hands-on analogies. So I want everyone to put one of your hands up, doesn't matter which one. Okay, now put your thumb across your palm. So, and then close your hand over it. So if this is your brain, then your thumb is your limbic system. And even though everything that happens there is subconscious, it has a really, really big effect on your prefrontal cortex, your conscious thoughts, your everyday interactions, and like conversations with people. And so it's constantly sending messages to the rest of your brain, either communicating we're good, we're okay, keep on keeping on, or like we're not okay, red flag, something's up. You can undo your hand, I was just showing you. But essentially, or you can keep it either way. If you want to keep your hand like this all night, totally great. But when your limbic system does get that feeling of like, oh shit, it basically, like, because it's being reminded of something from the past, for the sake of the analogy, essentially like pops open. So all of this, where your prefrontal cortex is, your conscious thoughts, your normal rational reasoning, is no longer accessible, and you're functioning out of your limbic system. So if you've ever heard of like fight, flight, or freeze, that also happens in your limbic system. The reason I'm giving you this like whole lesson on neuroscience is because sometimes, due to our unhealed pain or trauma, that stuff that's kind of trying to like get our attention to look beneath the surface, causes us to respond in ways that feel really normal and rational to us. But from an outside perspective, they're like, what is she doing? This is not a normal response to what's happening. I don't understand what's going on. So for me, this looked like pushing people away for the majority of my life and never letting anyone closer than an arm's length. My biological mother is an abusive alcoholic, and she eventually walked out of my life, walked back in, walked out, rinse and repeat. And when she was around, she was telling me that I was worthless and would never amount to anything, that I was unlovable, and then treating me like all these things were true, which are really powerful messages for our brain, especially at such a young age. And essentially, like, my limbic system was storing away that people, but especially women, could not be trusted, and that I was going to see life through this lens of trauma, where everyone in my life was going to have ulterior motives in their relationships with me, and doing this like give to get dance. So if love was accessible at all, it was going to be conditional, and relationships would always be unstable. So in my brain, the best thing that I could do for myself is never rely on anyone or let anyone in. And I also carried a lot of shame around this trauma, because we hear a lot about dads who walk out, and the last thing I want to do is like minimize that pain or experience, because it's very real, and I'm sure it is very, very, very hard. But what does our society say about mothers? They're like honored, they're revered as like people who put their lives on the line for their children. And I also don't want to take away from that either. There are some really amazing moms in the room, and y'all are superheroes. But if that wasn't my reality or my experience, then what did that say about me, right? So I was like internalizing things about my identity because my mom didn't love me and didn't spend the time to love me and to nurture me. So what this looked like was a middle school girl who pretended she had it all together, but really had no idea what she was doing, and definitely never talked about her experience. And when she did, like, it was making light of it, making jokes, like these defense mechanisms. But throughout middle school and high school, and especially college, I kind of jumped from friend group to friend group, like searching for belonging, and love, and to be loved. And I'm pretty much like 99.99999% extrovert, and always have been. So I would always be around people. Like, I could show up physically, like play games, whatever, joke around, but I'd leave feeling really empty, and I could never really understand why. I was like, none of these people know me, no one gets me, and if I had a bad night, I wouldn't know who to call, kind of thing. So, and then also every 3 to 6 months, I would usually break down about my mom, and this was followed by a lot of shame and anger towards myself, because I was like, you know, this has been going on for so long, nothing has ever changed, why am I not over it? Why can't I like get used to it? Why does this still bother me? Why does she still have a hold on me? And it always circled back to me being frustrated with my circumstances, and that I couldn't deal with them or cope with them. I thought, like, maybe I was being too sensitive, I was being overdramatic, and I just needed to get over it. And about the same time, I would regularly break down that I didn't have friends in my life who loved me, and that felt really hard and really unfair. I just felt like I was like losing and losing and losing and losing and losing. Like I don't have a mom who loves me, and I also don't have friends who love me, and it was really, really frustrating. One of my favorite quotes that I heard recently says, "Love is just the skin of knowing," and basically what it means is we can only love and be loved as deeply as we know and are known. So the reason I didn't have friends in my life who loved me is because I wasn't letting the friends who were in my life love me. And in hindsight, they were trying pretty hard, but I was holding them here. And I was like, no, you're not getting any closer, because if you do, you're gonna see me and you're gonna leave me. And the reason that I was doing all of this is because I was walking around with a big old metaphorical nail in my foot, and I was expecting it not to cause any pain. This nail had been in my foot for a while, right? Like this pain, this trauma, this abuse started really early. And so the wound had basically festered. My whole foot had become useless, for the sake of the metaphor. And the rest of me got really strong, very self-sufficient, fiercely independent. But I was dragging this foot behind me, like trying to forget about it, trying to ignore it. And it was really holding me back and like wreaking havoc on everything in my life. So Derek asked me when things change. He's like, where's the light here? And I was at this kind of like spiritual retreat / music festival, AKA like total dreamland. And this really wise woman asked, is pain bad? And that question sparked like kind of this line of thinking in my head. And I was like, maybe I should be paying attention to this pain instead of just running from it or pushing it away. And I started to kind of consciously take off that lens of trauma that I was seeing the world through, which sounds super simple, right? Like just take it off, easy. But this looked like, to do that, the first thing I had to do was acknowledge the pain for what it was. And it was life-altering, right? Like something that shouldn't have happened to me again and again and again. And something that should have been afforded to me, unconditional love and nurturing, was never accessible to me from my mother, who's the person that should provide that from day one. So of course my life was going to be different because of it. Of course I was going to be hurting. Of course that was going to affect my relationships. And I think that in the process of healing, validating our grief is really, really important. And then the next thing I had to do was acknowledge my defense mechanisms for what they were, which was life-saving. In the moment when I was being abused at an elementary age, I needed those walls, I needed those boundaries, I needed that protection. But then the hardest part was acknowledging that those walls were no longer serving me. They were actually hurting me, and that I was never gonna have deep and meaningful relationship until I started to let people in. And this process for me also included a lot of grace and forgiveness for my mom and for myself. That doesn't mean re-entering an abusive relationship. I think that boundaries are really, really, really important. But it does mean that I get to start letting other people in, my safe people, and I get to enjoy deep and meaningful relationship with them. So, and then unearthing some lies. I had to look at like, what lies have I believed and internalized about myself because of the way my mom treated me? And then how can I replace them with truth and identity? Super easy, like I said, like 5 steps, you're done one day. Not really. A lot of this happened in counseling with a licensed professional, which I would highly, highly, highly recommend. I've never met anyone who regrets going to counseling. I think really we all need counseling. But also included a lot of introspection, a lot of research, a lot of crying on my couch, and a lot of books, which I can give you the names of those if you're curious. But another important question I asked myself were who are my safe people? So let's go back to the analogy for a second. The little girl, she's running in the woods. She steps on the nail. She falls down screaming. What does she do next? Does she just rip the nail out and keep running? No, she doesn't. She probably goes home to someone who loves her, and she disinfects the wound, which if you've ever put hydrogen peroxide on a cut, hurts very, very, very badly, right? But we know it's good for us. And maybe she puts Neosporin on it, a gauze, I don't know, takes the weight off of it. Do you think she's out running in the woods again the next day? No, she's probably gonna give it some time to heal, right? Do you think she should avoid the woods altogether because she got hurt there? No, I don't think the woods are inherently bad. I think the nail caused a lot of pain, but I think there's good to come from the woods too. There's a lot of fun, there's a lot of adventure there, so I don't think she should avoid it altogether. But it is a scary place for her. She like has some trauma attached to it, So maybe the next time she goes, she brings a friend with her and she starts off walking, and then eventually she's jogging, she's running, she's jumping and exploring again. So what I'm saying is, pay attention to your pain, what hurts. Those are things we don't want to dive into, but they're really, really, really important, and I really strongly believe that they're indicating something beneath the surface. What hurts and what lies might you be believing about yourself because of something very real that you experienced or that happened to you, but that does not affect your identity or who you are. And then who are your trusted people? I think it's important to also think through that and to what extent you're going to let them in and in what environment. For me, I'm kind of linear, and so I literally made a list on my phone. I was like, these are 2 people that I trust with this amount of my story. And now that list is 15, and it's really cool, but I started with 2, and I started with like this much. I was like, I'm ready to let people in this much. But it goes and it goes and it grows and it grows. And that's how relationship, like deep, meaningful relationship happens, at least for me. And then I also want to give you hope. I don't think that our unhealed pain and trauma is just something to be dealt with or endured, but as cliche as it sounds, I think it can become our greatest strength, and I think it can really serve to help people. I found out this week that one of my students, his parents are going through a really nasty divorce, and he's 5. And I was 5 when my parents went through a really nasty divorce. And we also had some suspicion that abuse was happening in the household, and just found out that it was by mom, which I also understand. And there are a lot of, I don't want to say that I understand what he's going through because I experienced something similar, but I at least know where to start in loving him in the middle of that. And I'm really thankful for that. So where do we start, Kate? Great question. I just think that no one's here by accident. I think that this is kind of divine and a really ideal group of people. Because if you're here, you're at least willing to dive into a conversation around mental health. So there are some cards on the tables that are kind of like pieces of conversation, and I'll also put out some note cards. I meant to do that, but I forgot. And when I give you the note card, I want you to write down one of 6 words, and I'll say this again because you probably won't be able to remember it. But the 6 words are happy, sad, excited, scared, angry, or tender. And that's T-E-N-D-E-R, not T-I-N-D-E-R. But, or you can put down more than one if that feels accurate to you right now. But it's just a starting place, and it's meant to be expanded upon to whatever extent feels safe to you. And it would make my heart really happy if it were someone in this room that you talk to about it. But if that feels really scary or too much, that's totally okay. You can bring it home, talk to a roommate, talk to a family member, talk to someone on the phone. But I think like we just bury our heads. We get into our day-to-day, and we never really check in with how we're doing or how our people are doing. And I think that's an important thing to do. Because love is just the skin of knowing.